Hello everyone, so today we're going to be talking about the structure of the brain, and I decided to start with brain structure as opposed to pathophysiology, diagnosis, and symptoms of Alzheimer's because I thought it would be beneficial when conducting research to have a pre-established understanding of the structures of the brain. So let's get started. Alright, so as I said, we're going to be talking about the structure of the brain, in particular the cerebral cortex, which is the largest portion of the brain. The cerebral cortex is split into two main parts, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, and in these hemispheres are the frontal lobes, the parietal lobes, the occipital lobes, and the temporal lobes. So in addition, we're going to be talking about the cerebellum, which are those two small purple sections at the back of the brain, and we're also going to be talking about hippocampal formation, which is a structure within the limbic system. Some of its main features include the entorhinal cortex, the dentate gyrus, and the hippocampus. So as we go through, I'm going to start asking questions about how Alzheimer's disease impacts the structure of the brain. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the structure of the frontal lobe, and as you can see in the image, the frontal lobes are located at the most anterior part of the cerebral cortex. So the frontal lobes are said to be responsible for higher cognitive functions, and they contain numerous significant substructures, and substructures are basically just smaller structures that make up the frontal lobe and essentially determine its overall function. Some of its substructures include the prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex, motor and premotor cortices, Broca's area, and the middle and inferior frontal gyrus. So I'm not going to go into detail about the separate functions of each of the substructures, but I will talk about some of the overall functions. These include attention, thought, voluntary movement, decision making, and language processing. So next we're going to talk about what higher cognitive functions really mean. This really just refers to voluntary behaviors such as decision making, planning, problem solving, also voluntary motor control, cognition, intelligence, attention, a lot of the same things that we observed in the function of these substructures. What I've learned about the structure and function of the frontal lobe in relation to Alzheimer's disease is that in severe cases, patients will lose voluntary motor control, and this is one of the main functions of the frontal lobe. So there must be a connection between frontal lobe degradation and the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Additionally, a lot of our personality is determined by the substructures in each frontal lobe, and as Alzheimer's disease progresses, patients experience dramatic personality changes. So we can draw connections between the frontal lobe and Alzheimer's. But what I've noticed about this is that the frontal lobe doesn't seem to be affected until later on in the progression of Alzheimer's disease, which is something that I thought was interesting.